Hi guys, George with Troglodyne here to talk on a minor point that kind of confused me back when I was working on the Playwright for Perl module. Uh, I used a great module written 20 years ago now by Mark Jason Domnus, the author of, I believe it's Higher Order Perl. And it was a module called async, and you can use async data. Essentially, the idea is that it is asynchronous programming, which is by the definition basically a program running outside of the main execution flow of the main program, which essentially just means it's forking, right? It's forking or it's threading. It's doing something in parallel off to the side, right? So knowing the actual definition kind of hurts you in the modern era for programming because everything has sort of moved to the JavaScript paradigm, especially with like async await and other sorts of sugar around essentially event chaining. So when you see the async keyword, for example, in JavaScript, that does not actually mean you're going to necessarily execute anything in parallel to the main execution of the program. That's actually far from it. If you just write a whatever.js, load it on a web page, do an async function, and then await on it, it is really no different than immediately resolving the promise and then just chaining another promise. It's really just a bunch of sugar around that sort of stuff, so that like promise dot then essentially, right? So basically, rather than doing request chaining and having a big pyramid shaped hierarchy inside of your code, you just do async await, and it looks a lot like a sort of linear imperative program. Now, that works out great whenever you're using primitives that are async by their nature, like XML HTTP requests by default or things like that, because those are actually done in a sub-process no matter what. And that's sort of where I think JavaScript is blurring the definition, because async does not necessarily actually mean async. In fact, most of the time it just means a coroutine. So, and that's the sort of pattern I was starting to see on CPAN in modern day, like future async await or Felipe's promises interface on CPAN. Essentially, really, by themselves, they're just coroutine makers, right? They just make promises, they just do coroutines, and what you actually need is you need a forking event loop to actually make this work, which is essentially what JavaScript is. All of the event stuff like, say, add event listener on some kind of DOM node, that's basically just the same as, say, you're working on a pre-forking web server and you define a number of routes that are, then inserted into a routing table, and the event loop just loops over it and serves routes, right? And forks off new threads to handle whatever. It's the same exact concept with regard to the way the browser handles events. And it's the same with promises in that regard, so long as you're using those explicitly asynchronous interfaces. Now, when you're not doing that and you're just doing pure programming, like you're just pure JavaScript kind of stuff, it's actually going to behave a lot more like a coroutine unless you actually do something else, which is right here. It's promise.all and promise.all settled. So that's what actually does what you want with regard to executing outside of the main program flow. So that it's basically a parallel map is really all it is. So it's going to either return a list of every single one of the resolved promises, which you can then do something with in an imperative style if you want to, or you can do a then, and then it gives you a list of those return promises and yada, yada, yada. Whatever you're more comfortable with, you can do. Now, the other alternative is all settled. All that does is it forces everything to run, which is generally what you're going to want to do, whether it fails or not. The other one is just all, which will go until the very first one fails. And then I believe there's another one that essentially waits until the first one succeeds. So you've got a lot of flexibility with regard to how you actually do this sort of parallel execution. So I was very pleased to find out that there was built-in parallel map, unlike in, say, Perl, where there is no parallel map keyword built into the core libraries. Promise is obviously a core class, and it's got these wonderful, parallel map implementations. Parallel map, parallel first, parallel any as well is essentially what it is. So that's what I actually wanted, and so I'm starting to think that perhaps that's why people were so confused with regard to why did I choose an old module with open issues, things like that. Well, because it works and it's worked for years and it actually works based on what the definition of asynchrony is. From the point of view of the actual person programming the script itself. Now, from a point of view of the browser, every async await is going to be async because basically the browser just executes everything async. From the point of view of the implementers of async await, everything's async. Who cares, right? You know, it's fine. So it's a confusion, I think, of perspective, and that a lot of people they just use these tools without actually knowing what they really mean, and then as that sort of propagates, the meaning of what it is actually shifts into what it is in practice now for a lot of people is it's actually coroutines, unless you're using something that actually turns those coroutines into real parallel execution. So that's sort of the thing that I've worked on today and got some learning on. You might notice that this is sort of the Skunkworks project I've been working on for the last few days. This is a way to watch all the sorts of events that are occurring on a page. I may or may not have a product coming out of this. I think this part in particular, the watching stuff, since it's all JavaScript, I'm going to release that open source because you can't make a product out of JavaScript. Everyone can read it. Ha ha ha. But it's going to... The intent is that, you know, all this stuff you gather from the browser. Right now I'm working through some performance issues, but once this gets in the browser, the idea is you send Beacon back to Central HQ, and that's the kind of stuff that you can actually make a product off and hopefully start making money around here. And so that's sort of one of the projects we have going on. We're going to do a video here before very long about the goals we have in Q3. And this is going to be one of the open source goals we have. I put out a open source goals blog post this afternoon. I actually need to add this to those goals of getting it released. But that's the idea, is that, you know, it's close to the end of March, which is the end of Q2. We're going to do sort of a retrospective on what's happened in Q2 and what we're going to do in Q3 soon. So look forward to that. Like and subscribe to the video if this is on a platform that supports that, and we will see you all later. Bye.